Welcome everybody to the Scoundrel's Den. My name is Excoundrel. Some of you may know me from Vainglory. Some of you may know me from League of Legends. If you know me from either, then you'll know that Wild Rift is the ultimate game for me. I love mobile MOBAs, I love League of Legends, and this is basically marrying those two things together. Today we're going to be talking about Varus. AD carries are in a really good position in Wild Rift right now, and Varus is a champion that I love playing. This is going to be a bit of a tester, so I'd really appreciate your feedback. We're going to be looking at loadouts for Varus, so we're going to be looking at items, runes, and some of the summoner spells. We're going to be looking at some combos that make Varus work well, and then we're going to be talking about supports that pair well with Varus, and some of the power spikes to abuse in lane, as well as some examples of how to do that. So I hope you guys are ready. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe. But let's jump into the loadouts. So I'm going to use the Wild Rift loadout screen to talk a little bit about the builds and the rune choices that I have for Varus in this particular setup. So first of all is a very classic Varus build. Now if we had Ginsu's Rageblade, this would be included, but we do not have it in the game right now. So the current build that I like to go for Varus is Blade of the Ruin King into Rune's Hurricane, and then I like to move down a critical strike pathway, which includes Rapid Fire Cannon and Infinity Edge. And if I was to show you 25% critical rate, a 25% critical rate, and then another 25% critical rate to give a 75% critical rate overall. Now, if you really wanted to, you could add a Phantom Dancer at the end for extra attack speed and more critical rate. 4 critical strike items in this game will give you a 100% critical strike chance. But in this particular circumstance, we're using the Blade of the Ruin King because it's going to give us some life vamp and also gives us that extra attack speed that we need. And then I think as the final item, as I said, it could be Mortal Reminder if you need the armor penetration. It could be Bloodthirster. Death's Dance is a really good defensive item on AD carries in general, so you could actually utilize any item in that final slot however you like. But I like the cooldown reduction on Varus. It allows you to cycle your abilities more quickly, and actually your abilities give you a huge burst of damage when combined with your blight stacks. So that's why I quite like to have as much cooldown reduction on Varus, where it fits naturally into the build as well. In terms of runes, there are 2 major runes that you can have on Varus. First is Conqueror. This is the more classic rune. In general, you're going to get bonus AD per stack of Conqueror, and obviously you're going to have high attack speed, so you're going to generate Conqueror stacks very quickly. It's just the go-to rune for Varus. If you're feeling a little bit more fragile, then Fleet Footwork can be good for negotiating team fights and getting the increased movement speed and getting the heal. But for the most part, I would recommend Conqueror. I really like Triumph as a domination rune. This allows you to deal more damage to enemies that are on low HP, as well as also allowing you to regenerate 10% of your missing health when you take an enemy down. I actually think it's a really, really good rune for Varus in general. But you could run something like Weakness, which synergizes well with his kit, Hail of Arrows, and also his ultimate will apply movement impairing effects, so you're going to get a 5% damage bonus there. You could also run Brutal, which would give you straight up damage at the start of the game, which can be useful, or you could run Gathering Storm, which will allow you to scale a little bit further. All of the domination runes do work with Varus, but I quite like Triumph. So there are 2 major runes that I like to think about when running my Resolve rune. I would either like Hunter Titan, which allows me to get max health, and then Tenacity. I actually think it's the strongest rune if you're confident in getting kills. I think it's the strongest rune on the Resolve page in its entirety. You could run Backbone if you are worried a little bit about a certain type of damage that you're facing, or Conditioning, again, if you want to scale into the game. But Spirit Walker is a pretty good standard rune with 50 max health and 20% slow resistance. It's a pretty good catch-all rune that will never fail you. In terms of inspiration runes, I personally really like Hunter Genius for Varus because it's going to get you that extra cooldown reduction. I think many of the inspiration runes are not 100% viable. However, I will say that Mastermind is pretty good, especially if you're taking turrets. It's going to get you a little bit extra golden experience. But I think in general, the Hunter Genius rune is probably the best one overall. You could also consider Honey Fruit if you're thinking that you're going to take a lot of damage in lane. Spells, Flash, and Heal are the standard go-to. I've got some other builds that we can consider as well. This is an interesting one, and I've been testing it out a little bit. I'm not sure how I feel about it as of yet, but this is a Mana Mune Varus build that revolves around the use of the Mana Flow Band, giving you an extra 300 mana if you just hit 10 abilities, which is relatively easy with Varus. Mana Mune also then gives you an extra 700 mana, giving you a total of 1000 bonus mana, 2% of that 1000 bonus mana is going to be 20 extra AD. So that's a lot of AD that you're going to get for free. And also it's going to refund all of the mana or refund large portions of the mana that you have been spending. But then also you've got to add that 2% of max mana plus what Varus already has. So often you're going to end up with about 35 to 40 extra AD from Mana Mune, including the 25 that it gives you as a flat bonus, so that gives you 65. And then you're going to also get cooldown reduction on top of that too. So you're going to get quite a lot of useful stats for Varus from the Mana Mune. And also he's quite a an ability intensive character. So often using the Mana Mune will help keep you more sustained in fights. Blade of the Ruined King, into Runans, into Death Dance, into Phantom Dance are a bit more of a defensive build. I would say this build is still in testing for me, but feel free to give it a go. But I would recommend that the standard Varus build is the go-to. Or you could just have a very default AD carry build, where you're running 3 critical strike items in the form of Infinity Edge, Rapid Fire Cannon, and Phantom Dancer. You could even run Ginsu's, you could even run Runan's Hurricane if you wanted to. So for instance, if you don't need the armor penetration, what I would recommend is potentially just going into another critical strike item, which would give you 100% critical strike overall. And this is just a standard AD carry build where you run Infinity Edge first into Rapid Fire Cannon, or into Runan's Hurricane if you're running if you're running something that uses that. And again, this is a standard AD carry build, would work very well too. I would recommend using this one or this one for Varus, personally. The Mana Mune build is something that I'm testing, but I definitely would give it a shot in normal games and see how you get on with it. But if you're in ranked, stick to the ones that I know work 100%, which is this Varus build here, or just running a default AD carry build. But I generally tend to gravitate towards this one, and the flex item is the Death Dance, depending on what you need for the team that you're facing. So that's everything that you need to know about Varus, his runes, and his spells. Let's talk a little bit about some of the combos that you can make, and some of the tips and tricks in terms of using Varus in actual fights. So let's first of all talk about Varus's abilities, starting with his passive, which is Living Vengeance. Varus will gain 40% attack speed for 5 seconds on killing a champion or assisting on a champion kill, and he'll gain 20% attack speed on non-champion kills, which essentially means minions or monsters. His first ability, often referred to as his Q ability in the normal League of Legends, is a ability called Piercing Arrow. Varus will draw his bowstring, he'll charge up a rather large skill shot, which will then fire out, dealing physical damage, increasing in physical damage with the amount of time that he spent drawing the bow back. It has AD scaling, and the damage is reduced per enemy that is hit. Piercing Arrow's cooldown is reduced by 4 seconds if the arrow detonates blight stacks on at least one enemy champion. Piercing Arrow will fail if it is not released after 4 seconds, but will refund part of its mana cost. So I'm going to show you Piercing Arrow now. You can see here, draws his bowstring, has a rather long range, and fires across, dealing damage, and you can see that the damage reduced from 199 to 174 between those 2 target dummies that were hit. Let's go back and take a look at his next ability. So Blight Stacks, you may have heard them mentioned in that previous ability. His second ability, or his W, sometimes referred to in traditional League of Legends, is Blighted Quiver. Blighted Quiver adds passive magic damage to Varus's base attacks with an AP scaling, and it applies Blight for 6 seconds, which can stack up to 3 times. Varus's other abilities detonate Blight, dealing magic damage equal to 4.5% of the target's max health per stack. So if you have absolutely no ability power, you will be able to detonate a Blight stack for around 13.5% of the target's max health, which is a decent amount of damage, and that comes in the form of magic damage. If you activate this ability, it will double the on-hit damage from Blighted Quiver's passive for 4 seconds, and the next Piercing Arrow deals bonus magic damage equal to 14 to 21% of the target's missing health, and increased by 0 to 50% based on Piercing Arrow's channel time. So I'm going to show you this in action now. We are attacking like this, and you can see we're dealing 10 damage on passive attack. You can see that as the 10 that is floating up. That's slightly increased damage now that I've stacked Conqueror. I'm now going to activate Blighted Quiver, and you're going to notice I'm dealing 20 damage per basic attack coming from Blighted Quiver, and I'm stacking these little purple orbs on these dummies, and these are your Blight stacks. I'm going to show you on this dummy target over here. I'm going to wait for that one to reset. So you remember the previous was 199 on the first hit. We've activated Blighted Quiver, charged it all the way up, and you can notice that I did 274 damage with my first Piercing Arrow after the use of Blighted Quiver. So it's a pretty significant damage boost off the back of activating my second ability. Let's take a look at our third ability, Hail of Arrows. Fires a hail of arrows that deals 205 physical damage and desecrates the ground for 4 seconds. Desecrated Ground slows the enemies by 40% and applies Grievous Wounds. Grievous Wounds is a debuff that reduces healing effects by 50%. Hail of Arrows is a really good way to detonate blight stacks. And actually, I'm going to show you a little trick after we've gone through his abilities about the way that you can use Hail of Arrows to detonate blight stacks. But it's a really good way of detonating blight stacks in an area of effect. And it's actually a very good harass tool in lane. One of the very basic and simple ways of dealing with blight stacks is just by using Hail of Arrows on the first target that you're attacking, like this. Straight after you're going to stack your blight. There is a little trick that I'll show you later on that you can use to try and get an easily applicable 3 blight stack after only using 2 basic attacks, and I'll show you that in a moment. That combos really nicely with Varus's ultimate ability, which is the Chains of Corruption. It flings out a tendril of corruption that deals 250 magic damage with AP scaling and roots the first enemy champion hit for 2 seconds. The corruption then spreads towards nearby enemy champions, also immobilizing them on contact. Immobilized units gain 3 blight stacks over the next 3 seconds. And that synergizes really nicely with Hail of Arrows. I'm going to show you an example here. Do this. 1, 2, 3. It spreads over. 1, 2, 3. The blight stacks, and boom, detonate all the blight stacks off the back of using my Chains of Corruption. Chains of Corruption is a really excellent utility spell. It's really great for engaging fights, and it makes Varus a very... When it comes to level priority and which abilities to put points in, like with most champions, the priority is always your ultimate, so whenever you can put a point in Chains of Corruption, you should do so, followed by his Piercing Arrow ability, then his Blighted Quiver, and eventually you'll be maxing his Hail of Arrows last. Varus has a unique playstyle as an AD carry. He's not purely about his basic attacks, although you can definitely make him reliant on them. He is about comboing the blight stacks with the rest of his abilities to deal burst damage. He's got tank shredding ability innately built into his kit, as the blight stacks deal damage based on current HP values, which can often be very large for those tankier members, as well as the fact that he has hybrid damage. He has both magic and physical damage built into his kit, making him very unique at bypassing a lot of the natural resistances that tanks might want to build into traditional AD carries. So I mentioned earlier a small trick that you can do on Varus using his blight stacks and his Hail of Arrows. What you can do with Varus is, instead of waiting for 3 blight stacks and then casting your ability, with Hail of Arrows you can cast, or you can basic attack 2 times, and during the cast time of the Hail of Arrows skill, you can actually land another basic attack, applying 3 blight stacks before the ability actually lands on the target, guaranteeing you get the full proc, but actually applying the damage a little bit earlier than you would have done normally. This can be really good for clutch situations, and it's one of the key skills in understanding how Varus can trade efficiently in the lane. So just practice this in the practice mode, make sure that you launch Hail of Arrows after your second basic attack lands, and then by the time it actually procs the target, you should have landed another basic attack following that, ensuring that you have all 3 blight stacks ready. So how do we play Varus in the laning phase? Well, Varus has got a very long range for an AD carry. Compared to most other AD carries, he'll have a slight edge in able to landing basic attacks that are a little bit further than other AD carries can manage. People like Jinx, when they transform into Pow Pow, should be able to keep pace, but for the most part, Varus has a longer than average basic attack range, meaning he can trade pretty freely with a lot of AD carries just by having that excessive range to deal with. When you're playing Varus in lane, you're going to want to make sure you abuse certain power spikes in his kit. One of the power spikes that you want to try and use is level 3, when you have access to all 3 of your abilities. That is going to allow you to proc Blighted Quiver and use 2 abilities to make sure you make those burst damage moments happen. Following that, the next 2 best power spikes to use are level 5, when you get access to your ultimate, your Chains of Corruption, which is going to allow you to engage and also proc Blighted Quiver stacks in another way. And then level 7, which is going to allow you to have 4 points in your Piercing Arrow, really maximizing the damage output of this particular ability. So knowing that, and knowing that Varus can outtrade most AD carries with the ability to burst damage, you can actually win a lot of lane matchups with the right support, just because Varus has very little competition in the ability to trade, especially in the early game, when he's already going to outpace most other AD carries in the field. Varus does eventually fall off and will not be able to keep pace with the likes of Jinx and Ashe in the late game, especially in terms of raw safe damage output, but he's a great laning phase AD carry. When deciding on what support to pair with Varus, make sure that you are considering supports that have some kind of crowd control, including snares, stuns, or hooks, or knockups, or whatever you have, because that allows Varus to get free auto attacks in, and if Varus can get free auto attacks in and then stack them up and then proc his blight stacks, you're usually going to win most trades. Really good supports to pair with Varus are things like Lux, if you can land your binding, things like Blitzcrank, if you can land your hook, things like Alistair with your headbutt pulverize combo. Soraka is okay, but probably not preferable. Things like Braum, who can protect Varus, and you can also make use of Braum's stun passive. Things like Nami for her bubble, and if you can hit her bubble and her empowered basic attacks, the Tidecaller's Blessing, they're pretty good because Varus has that extended range. Supports that are okay include Janna. She's decent, but she's not as good as some of the other supports when paired with Varus. Sona, again, decent, but not as good as some of the other supports that have kind of heavy CC. And Soraka, as I said before, these are decent supports, but I would say that the other supports with some kind of CC are usually going to be better when paired with Varus in the laning phase. In terms of counters to Varus, Varus struggles against assassins and people that are able to close the distance on him and apply CC. Varus does not have any mobility built into his kit, and therefore he will struggle versus the likes of Akali, struggle versus the likes of Jax, he will struggle versus the likes of Zed, he will struggle versus the likes of Yasuo. Something like Jarvan is pretty good at locking him in place when he doesn't have flash. Things like Lee Sin, Master Yi especially. In lane, things like Blitzcrank can be an issue if you're unable to dodge the hooks. These types of champions, Camille especially, she's pretty good at dealing with Varus. The way that you need to think about counters to Varus is anything that can close a distance on you and apply CC to you, because Varus does not have the ability to escape without the help of either his summoner spells or an ally. And so Varus is very low mobility. So hyper mobile, especially assassin type carries, can deal with Varus relatively well. And that was it for my first guide on Varus. I hope that you enjoyed. He's a really strong AD carry in the meta right now, and can definitely be built in a multitude of ways. As I said before, I would recommend the Blade of the Ruined King route, or just going down a default Infinity Edge, like traditional AD carry route, as both of these will suffice. He's got really good trading potential, has great engage and utility, and is definitely up there in terms of current AD carries that are strong in the meta. If you like the content, feel free to like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me, and I hope to see you on the Rift soon.